You need to replace the battery every year. Your smoke alarms need to be replaced every 10 years. Smoke alarms protect the ones you love. Make sure they are working today. If you need to replace your smoke alarms or need additional smoke alarms, please call 651 279 5976. We can help. See you next time. Did you know that smoking is the leading cause of fatal fires? If you smoke, you need to smoke outside and away from any buildings. Make sure you extinguish your smoking materials in a metal or glass container filled partway with sand or water. Never smoke in bed or while tired. Make sure you keep lighters and matches picked up and away from children. Make sure you have working smoke alarms in your home and test them monthly. If you need to replace or get additional smoke alarms, please call 651 228 6273. We can help. See you next time.
It's going to be a minute. I hope. Raphael's in charge.
I'd like to call to order the Committee on Safety and Justice. Today's agenda is state fair request for security services. Scott, I will turn this over to you, and I believe we have Jerry Hammer is going to be our first guest.
Sure. I'll open it up, and Mr. Hammer, if as I'm speaking, you could come up and take one of these chairs, that would be helpful. Mr. Chair, Commissioners, sure. This board workshop time slot had originally been planned for opportunity for the sheriff to have a conversation with the board about unbudgeted costs for civil unrest preparedness. But after the sheriff announced to commissioners on June 9th about the intent or the recommendation to enter into a security services agreement with the State Fair, it just made sense to pivot this opportunity to a discussion of that of the agreement about the services that are being requested by the State Fair. So we expanded the invitation list to include General Manager, State Fair General Manager Jerry Hammer to come here and to be part of this conversation. In the way of background, the State Fair historically has had its own police department, and that is not just for the 2 weeks of the State Fair, but for year-round patrol services, for 24/7 security, for special events on the weekends. As I came to the county way back in the day, I won't say how many years, but and started working on the 911 system for Ramsey County, and just really began to appreciate the extent to which the state fairgrounds are used outside of the 2 weeks of the state fair, and how many events are, concerts, and we just had the Back to the 50s, and how common those types of events are. And so what had been so 2 year ago, that relationship with 911 actually culminated with a joint powers agreement for 911 services with the State Fair, because that operation had been, the on-site dispatching had been handled by the State Fair Police Department, and it used off-duty Ramsey County 911 personnel, and everybody involved just agreed that it made more sense for the county to take that over under a joint powers agreement. We know from media reports in the last few months that the state, their chief of police decided to retire, and following that, the board announced that they wanted to go a different direction and wanted to partner with an existing law enforcement agency to cover their security needs, and that then led to conversations, my understanding led to conversations with the sheriff's office. At that point, the timeline picks up with the sheriff's memo that he shared with commissioners on June 9th, laying out the dates when those conversations with the State Fair staff commenced. So we have an agenda for today that can be used to guide the discussion to the extent that that we need this to guide the discussion. It opens with a discussion of the services that were requested by the fair, and then some issues that are on the table that need to be resolved that are listed in the agenda. And so with that, my understanding is General Manager Hammer is poised to go first to address the board.
Welcome, Mr. Hammer.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to visit with you all today. Things have been happening at a pretty quick pace, but they have to, and that's a good thing. Just for perspective, My daughter taught English to middle school kids in Japan in the late aughts, 07, 08. And we went to visit her, and local from Tokyo, I had a Minnesota State Fair jacket on, imagine that. And he asked me why we don't have a live butcher exhibit at the fair. English was very good, and he was incredibly interested in why don't we do this? And I said, well, I asked him, do you think that would play well in Japan, where you bring in a whole animal and, you know, convert it to steak and burger and all that? And he said, yeah, but it'll work there. I said, I don't think our audience would necessarily appreciate that. And I bring that up only because I'm on the other side of the world talking about the Minnesota State Fair to a guy from Japan who's very familiar with it. That's happened elsewhere around the world as well. Same kind of questions we get. The last time we had a fair, 2019, we had ticket buyers from all 50 states plus 33 nations around the globe. So it's kind of a thing, and it's easy to lose sight of that. I know I'm guilty of it a lot. I grew up a block away. I've been working there since I was 15. And when something is right there and it's a big part of your life for your whole life, you don't necessarily understand the broad impact that it has. But over time, and through the privilege of working for a wonderful institution like the fair, really get to understand that and have seen that in so many ways. So the social impact is extraordinary. I know you're all familiar with the fair, but nothing brings people together like the fair. It doesn't matter who they are, where they're from. I've watched people sit down. You know they're from opposite ends of the state. You know, politically, they have nothing to do with each other, but they're sharing a bucket of cookies. You know, and nothing brings people together like the state fair. So that social impact is immeasurable. Economic impact. Last time we had a fair, it was just a hair under 300 million in the Twin Cities alone, with a good portion of that, maybe even the majority of it, in Ramsey County. The Super Bowl is often seen as this huge economic boon. Let's build a new stadium. Maybe we can get a Super Bowl. It'll be good for promotion. It'll be good for, you know, visitors. It'll attract attention from around the world. It'll be worth all this economic development. The fair does the same thing every year, but pretty quietly. Years ago, I have no idea what the topic was anymore, but something came up in the legislature, unintended consequences. So it would have affected the fair. So I had a talk with the legislator, and he said, man, we didn't think about that. The fair's ubiquitous. You're like the sky. You're everywhere. And again, when we're so involved in it, or we live here and the fair's been part of our lives, for all our lives, we have a little different attitude. But it's wildly popular. Not my words. It was either New York Times or Time Magazine called it wildly popular, and we're lucky to have it. It's a tremendous community asset. Ramsey County for sure, the Twin Cities, more broadly Minnesota. So just a little bit of background. Our police department, we have operated our own police department for decades. Actually, we've been attached at the hip to Ramsey County all those years. You all knew Art Blakey, very well, legendary chief for nearly 40 years, but even before that, he was deeply involved, as we have been with the Ramsey County Sheriff's Department. They've done outstanding work on our behalf. And Scott mentioned a couple of years ago, we framed up a new agreement for, it's what we call a dispatcher agreement, but it's much more than that. Basically, it's information sharing, networking, all of that is all part of that agreement, so that's been done. The reality is that although we operated the department ourselves, it involved law enforcement agencies from all over the state, not just Minnesota. We had some Wisconsin folks here as well. But the truth is Ramsey County has really done a lot of that work during all of that time. So how did we get where we are today, if it's okay? Just a timeline, just review for everybody. Chief Paulus informed us that he was going to retire in early March, but actually mid-March. It was after jury selection had started in the Chauvin trial, and our deputy general manager in charge of operations had a conversation right away with Chief Axtell with St. Paul just for get some background, get some info, and with the trial underway, jury selection, and then the trial, it really offered us no opportunity to have any discussions with anybody. Until the trial was over, the verdict was announced April 20th, and with a week afterwards for things to kind of settle down where law enforcement could become more engaged answering questions, we met right away. Once again, our Deputy GM for Operations met with John Harrington and Booker Hodges with State Public Safety, again, just to kind of get the lay of the land, and they offered a few suggestions, one of which made most sense, and that was Ramsey County Sheriffs. Now, again, we've been working very closely with the Sheriff's Department all these times, but if you look elsewhere around the country, and we've had conversations again, one of the great things about being involved with fairs is you wind up with resources all over the country. None of us are competitors. We all work together to help each other. And for every big fair in the U.S., with no exceptions, it's a local law enforcement agency. Majority of cases, it's the county sheriff that provides law enforcement services. In some cases, it's state patrol, and in a couple, in Dallas and in Puyallup, just south of Seattle, it's the city police department. In all cases, though, they're supplemented by, if it's the state patrol that's in charge of security, they're supplemented by the county sheriff. When the county sheriff is in charge, then will be state patrol and other agencies. That's just a very typical, normal way for it to work. We were the outlier operating our own police department, and partnering, teaming up with Ramsey County to provide the law enforcement portion of our public safety program makes a whole lot of sense. Commissioner Harrington wrote a note, very detailed letter a few weeks back saying all the same things. Basically, he walks through that same timetable and how we got where we are. So meanwhile, 6 weeks ago, we weren't sure what the fair might look like. 8 weeks ago, we weren't sure if there was going to be a fair. So all of this is happening on an accelerated time frame, but thank goodness we kept our operation intact. There's a lot of things that need to be done prior to the fair. This is one of them. This is a very important piece, but there are lots of agreements that haven't been established just yet, but they will be. We got the right people in the right spot to take care of that and make sure that we're in good shape, ready to go. So when we did meet with Sheriff Fletcher, he and his staff have been outstanding. They got right to work, established a command structure, brought some services in that we weren't looking at. It's all part of a comprehensive plan that's outstanding, very detailed. And the sheriff and his staff have been really, really good about handling this. It's been outstanding to work with, very responsive and right there, right now. The same can be said for Scott, who I didn't know until May 27th, our first phone call. Scott has also been very helpful on the administration end. So it's all moving in the right direction. We're talking to all the right folks, doing all the right things, and looking forward to continuing our relationship and expanding on it with Ramsey County Sheriff's Department. That's the short version. There was a question, I got to tell you this. There was a question, and it is the question, regarding liability. In every case but one with the large fairs around the country, whatever the law enforcement agency is, they've taken that on. We're going beyond that, and I think 30 seconds into our first conversation, I told Scott, no, we'll have no problem. We'll take the liability, that's fine. We looked back 5 years to see how many issues we had that involved insurance with police activity during the fair. In 2017, an officer accidentally hit a car with his flashlight directing traffic. The car got too close to him. Wasn't his fault, but there was a bill for $298 for damage to a headlight. That's been it. We've had no other liability issues. Doesn't mean we won't. It's an important part of what we do, but that's the type of thing that we're familiar with at the fair. So I'd be happy to entertain questions.
Thank you very much. Any
Mr. Chair?
questions?
Are we doing individual, how are we gonna
We're
run
gonna-
this?
Mr. Hammer is here. He was not on the schedule, so I'm going to allow questions. Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you for the information. I mean, I think you're preaching to the choir on how important the state fair is to this community and what it means to us as a community, but to us as individuals. We all got our stories. Appreciate that, though. I'm going to push back a little bit, though, here on the suggestion here. I mean, the fair in itself made the decision not to move forward with the model it had in place that worked really well for them. The timing of that is, really unfortunate here 2 months out from the fair. And it's really put us in a position here locally, the issue about liability, and I appreciate you saying you're going to take that on, but I've also heard it's not outside the fair, that there's going to be some issues like the event that just was held this past weekend. But there's a big impact here locally, within the Sheriff's Department and statutory requirements there. We've already heard from the bench and the impact it might have on the services that's statutory there. We're hearing from employees that they've already been told that, cancel all medical appointments, all dental appointments, be prepared to work, on your days off. And this is for a non-emergency event. They all understand civil unrest and emergency events, but this is a non-emergency event. So we're being put into a position here really quickly to have a huge impact not only on our workforce, but on other parts that the sheriff is statutorily required to run a jail, to transport people to a hospital. All these other things are going to take, my concern here is they'll take a back seat to, the sheriff in his commitment to providing safety, public safety at the fair. Not that it can't be managed, but to try to figure that out in a very short period of time, I think is really unreasonable. It's a state-owned property. The state fair is, in statute, the state has that requirement. They've delegated it to the Agricultural Board. I would suggest to Commissioner Harrington, no, it's a state responsibility to figure this out in this period of time and be the coordinator and bring in all the folks and take on the management of that, and it would make much more sense for that to happen there. But to put that liability, to put that impact on one department in one operation here just seems really unreasonable at this point in time. So this list, certainly, I appreciate the work that people have put into it and trying to figure this out moving forward, but I think that gets ahead of the question. Should we even be having the conversation of the Ramsey County Sheriff's Department taking on this responsibility when this is clearly a state, the impact of this fair and the benefit to this fair is statewide, and why is not the state the leading then on a decision that the Fair Board made to eliminate a service that's worked well for them for, decades?
Is that a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think it's more for, the board as much as anybody for us to have that conversation. I don't want us to get ahead of, into the weeds about what's the impact, certainly these need to be answered. But I think for this board, the first question is, should we even be having the conversation? Are we the right organization? Shouldn't you be going to the state and having that conversation with Commissioner Harrington and the Department of Public Safety?
Yeah, we've had that conversation with the commissioner.
And he sent us to you, you
Well-
to us. I would suggest we should send you back to him.
Well, all of what we're doing this year is in a very compressed time frame. And I don't think there's anything unreasonable at all about anything we're asking for from anyone. We know how important the fair is, and we need to do everything we can to make sure it succeeds in the best way that it possibly can. And there are, again, this is the model around the country. They've had other fairs, other cities, other communities, other states have all found ways to make it work. And I've been, in our conversations with the sheriff, we're more than confident that they can handle all their duties. This won't be just the county sheriff's department. It will involve other agencies. The state's on board to provide up to 30 officers if needed, and that's just one piece of the overall public safety program. It also involves emergency medical, EMTs, private security companies, metal detectors at gates, all of those types of services. So this is a piece, but the Sheriff's Department has been very closely involved in the fair from the get-go with officers, with services, with people. And yes, this is a step up from how closely they have been involved, but we're very confident that can all happen based on our conversations with the sheriff and his folks.
Just one thing, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that, but I mean, there's, you know, again, certainly those things can happen if other things are put on the back burner, right? I mean, we've got, you know, a lot of things, and in the end, that agreement has to be with the county board, which is my understanding from our attorneys, right? And for the county board has to have a bigger, we have a responsibility for 550,000 people in this county, but also for the property taxpayers and the risks that we take and the priorities that we make as far as where we're gonna put our efforts in. And I'm not sure that this is a priority, that we should be taking up a lot of air in the room when we've got so much other things that we need to be paying attention to that are our responsibility. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Victoria?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we all have our stories. I mean, I went to the state fair as a kid. I took my kids. I take my grandchildren. And we go at least 2 or 3 times a year. And so we even tried to get tickets last year, but for the drive-through, but we couldn't get through to them. They sold out way too fast. Anyway, so I just want you to know that there is no question about the importance of the state fair and about public safety and security there. And so I don't want anyone to make it sound like this county board is not in favor of the fair. We are all part of that experience. We've lived that experience. And I think I can say we all love the fair. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're not here to talk about how much fun it is, what the great food is, and all these other things. This is a contractual relationship. And I'm sorry to say it, but I think you got caught in the middle. Because we did not know, as a county board, that these discussions were going on at all. Until May 27th, was it, Scott? When we were notified that the contract was going to go, or not even a contract, there isn't a contract, a letter, that they were going to start performing services on June 1st. Didn't come to the county board. We need a contract. I mean, at the very least, we need a contract that has to be approved by us, not by the sheriff. It has to be approved by us. And I can tell you that the sheriff, in the meeting that we first found out about this, there were 4 contracts on that agenda that were with through the sheriff's office. So it's not as if they didn't know. They did. And they didn't bring it here. We didn't know anything about this until it was right on top of us. And it does make me question the validity of, not for you at all, but it was right on top of us. And so it was pretty much, well, you have to do this because it's a state fair. You know what? We don't have to do it. We want to figure out a way to get there, so don't get me wrong. But this, you got caught in the middle of this. And I'm sorry that happened, but we've got to figure out how we can do this. You mentioned liability and insurance, and you're willing to take all of that on. And you mentioned the one thing that happened. But you know what? That was an employee of the state fair. These are employees of Ramsey County. I don't think you can take on that liability or the insurance because it's our employee. You can easily do it for your own employees. We have to provide it for our employees. And right now, if something were to happen, those employees are not going to come to Ramsey County. They can't. There's no contract in place. They're kind of hung out there to dry right now. And I don't think you probably recognize that, but that's the way it appears to us. And we've been trying to figure all of this stuff out. But there's a lot to this. But they are Ramsey County employees. So I don't think you can take that on. But it wasn't discussed with us anyway. So I guess I just want to make sure, especially as we have other folks from the sheriff's office and others coming up here, that it is very clear that we love the state fair and we want to make this work. But this isn't something that can be done in a letter on a piece of paper that covers all of these issues and more within a very short period of time. We will do whatever, I mean, we're going to go through all these questions. We're going to try to figure this out. But I don't think that it is fair in any way, shape, or form that the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners is put in a spot where we are told, if you don't do what we want, the sheriff's office, if you don't do what we want, the state fair can't happen. Because we have to take care of the fiduciary responsibility. I'm chair of the budget committee. This is a big deal. We've had so many things going on as far as public safety. And as I said, we were supposed to have this conversation about the civil unrest costs, which we cover. You know, but they come to us because once we know what those costs are, and we figure all that out. But we have to be responsible for this. This is part of the Ramsey County budget. And we have to treat it as such. And so we've got a lot of issues that we need to work out. But if I know that people will try to paint it as the Ramsey County Board is trying to stop the fair, it simply isn't true. It simply isn't true. But we do have a responsibility to every taxpayer, to every person that comes into Ramsey County, to make sure that we are doing what is best for this county and for our employees. I do not want the Ramsey County deputy sheriffs out there without the coverage of being a Ramsey County employee and hoping that you can somehow do that even though they're not your employee. So if I sound emotional about this, I am, because I really care about the fair. I'm looking forward. I was so excited when it was going to happen. And then I found out about this and going, okay, now what do we do? If we can't get this worked out, this is not going to fall on us. I know it will be painted that way, but it is not on us. We will do whatever we can to make it work. But we're not going to shortchange Ramsey County residents in public safety elsewhere or other parts of our budget. And I do thank you very much for your work. I know, I mean, having been involved with the University of Minnesota Extension Service and many different parts, having set up the first recycling program that the Minnesota State Fair had through a grant. I was a grants administrator. So this is part of my blood. And I truly do care about all aspects of it, but not at the cost of liability or lacking public service, public safety elsewhere, the health and welfare of all of our residents and those that are visiting us. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony?
Well, thank you. Commissioner Reinhardt has shared her concerns, the concerns that we all share regarding our budget, regarding our residents, and the protection of our residents from undue costs and undue risk. And I know that first and foremost, we want to thank you for being here. There are a lot of questions that we have, and clearly we want to see the fair proceed. We all have our favorite stories, as the commissioners have said, and would like to continue in those traditions that we share at the fair with our families, with our friends and relatives, and those who come to visit us every year. Our concerns today, which you may not have taken pause to think about as you were discussing with the sheriff, is exactly that. We want to protect our residents, to ensure that we are thoughtful in the exercise of our responsibility to do that. And that is why we sent a letter to you through the county manager. We asked you to come here, and we're thankful that you're here. You're going to hear a number of questions posed, to which there may be some answers. There likely will be a number of questions for which there are not going to be answers today. But that, should we move forward to entertain this work with you through our sheriff's office, will need to be answered. So we are hoping that today, in posing these questions and having them seriously undertaken and then deliberated, that we are able to be a part of helping the state fair to happen. We all want that. There is certainly, I believe, an appreciation that you have today for the fact that this is not simply a contract with our sheriff, that it does require the approval of the county board. And because there are so many who are engaged in this process in order to provide protection and law enforcement coverage, that it needs to be beyond a mere contract, an intergovernmental agreement. And so we are going to be looking forward to discussing that, understanding there are many pieces of the work, because everyone, since hearing on June 9th from the sheriff, the recommendation to move forward, has been leaning in to try and get pieces of this work done and to try to make certain that we were alerting you and others to the responses that would be required. We are looking forward to hearing also, and I'll ask you this question, because there are other pieces of this work and not just those dates. I understand Commissioner Reinhardt has said, we don't know whether you can provide the protection for our employees, the liability coverage for them. We do know that there are costs for that coverage, for the state fair, and for the times in preparation for and beyond the state fair. So the question that I have is about your preparation to provide the financial support for that liability.
Yeah, we're willing and able to do it.
At the state fair, beyond the state fair,
Yes.
for whatever relationship
Yes.
we can.
Yep.
I appreciate that response, and again, I'm looking forward to the many questions that we also will pose, not only to you, but to our sheriff, and the responses there as well.
Are you done, Tony?
I am.
Thank you. Trista?
Thank you very much. It's nice to meet you. I represent the community immediately outside of your state fair. And this will be the first time we get to meet. I've been told that you're Switzerland, and so that's why we haven't been able to get together. And what I've heard from the neighbors is that they feel very isolated and cut off from the state fair. So there is a fence around the building, and I've been told, and I quote, "The state fair has made it perfectly clear that you have no responsibility or interest in what happens outside the gate." And so I'll just say that's where I come into question. You just mentioned that liability in 2017, someone bumped into a car and it was a few $100s. But we also know in 2019, there was a shooting outside the fairground on the last day. And though you can wash your hands and say it wasn't your responsibility, it was a spillover from events that happened within the gates, that happened outside the gates. So I think the question about liability comes in is, where's the responsibility? Here in Ramsey County, racial equity is part of our work. It's our values. We want a community that thrives. And we know that for several years, I've witnessed that there's been protests out in front of the fair because there are people, especially people of color, that don't feel like the fair is welcoming or inclusive of them. And so as we think about from our value point and from the liability standpoint, are you saying you're willing to do the liability inside that fence? Or are you willing to take responsibility for what happens because of spillover from the fair? And that's a very big difference. We know I just participated in the renaming of Philando Castillo Memorial Way outside the fairgrounds. And the community there shared once again that they had reached out numerous times to the state fair for the Peace Garden and that they got a really cold shoulder and that it wasn't a part of the community. And so I will just say that this is not just about what happens inside the fence at the state fair, but what happens to our community surrounding the state fair and where that liability lies.
Wow. I grew up on Breda. My wife grew up on Canfield. We now live on Huron, right by Como Park. We've never left the neighborhood. I haven't heard, living there my whole life, people say they feel cut off or isolated. That's new one to me. And as far as the Peace Garden goes, Sue Geertz, the former mayor of Falcon Heights, we've worked very closely with her. She's been very appreciative of everything we've done. So I don't know where that one, I honestly don't know where that one's coming from either. We've heard nothing but positive comments from neighbors and their thanks for us participating in the garden. I have nothing other to say. That's all news to me. I haven't heard it. And again, I've lived the neighborhood my whole life. And just never haven't. People know me, and I see them all over the place. That's news to me.
I guess we talked to different people, because I certainly at the event, there wasn't anyone from the fair at the renaming event. And so I was told people came to me because this was in the news by then about the taking over of the policing for the state fair, and neighbors wanted to share a different experience. And so I want to go back to my question about the spillover. So certainly a liability of a shooting outside the fair is much more than a few $100s. And we want to talk about what does that look like and where does that lie? Are you indemnifying the whole experience and related to, or are you strictly talking about what happens with inside the gate?
I brought that example up because that's the claim that we've had in the last 5 years. No other reason than that. That's what we've had. What happens in the neighborhood is of great importance and great concern to us, and the words that keep sticking are cut off, and we don't do that whatsoever. Gates are open, people are welcome to come in anytime, and they do. They're always around. As far as activity outside the grounds, we do have a joint powers agreement with the city of St. Paul, and however any particular incident like that would ultimately shake out, depends on what it is and exactly what happens. But that was extremely unfortunate that happened at all. I was maybe 100 feet away at the time that it did, and that was nobody was anything other than very surprised and shocked that would happen so close to the fair. But we're not just concerned with inside the fairgrounds, we're of course concerned with everywhere.
Thank you, and thank you for answering that, because that's what I'm hoping to hear. I actually am hoping that we have an opportunity here to grow a relationship. I can tell you, I'm one of the newer members on the board. I haven't felt a strong relationship with the fair during the pandemic when we were in crisis and looking to find housing for our homeless community. During a pandemic, we reached out numerous times to the fair with either no response or very cold no, knowing that you had dormitories that could be temporarily available. I've also heard from the University of Minnesota and watershed districts around a lack of good partnership around the water runoff that happens at the fair. And so for me, it's like, is this a chance, by the way, this is great for me to finally get to meet you as your county commissioner and the state fair's county commissioner, but is there an opportunity here, not just with this incident of this year's state fair, but to actually grow a working partnership? And that's the kind of commitment that I'm looking for, is beyond this year's fair, this year's security, whatever that may or may not look like. But is there an opportunity to have a authentic, engaged partnership? Because you're in our community, you're there, you're not Switzerland, despite how it might be regulated, to have a real relationship with what happens outside of your gates.
Well, I do have to address the dorm thing, and I'm sorry for going down this road. There was no cold no, there's no dormitories. The 4-H building is not heated.
Well, we didn't need heat
so
in the
it's
summertime.
right up, you do, well, the question came up in the winter.
Yeah.
And there's no heat, and it's a room like this full of bunk beds. Really not suitable even if there had been heat. But when the question came up, it was winter. It was not a cold no, it was an explanation. And what I got was, oh, thanks, very good. Thanks very much, we understand now. And again, we're talking to different people for sure. We're very engaged with District 10 in our neighborhood, and the St. Anthony Park neighborhood as well. So, I think we need to talk more.
Great, thank you.
Good.
Thanks.
Nicole?
Thank you, Chair. Let's take a deep breath. I'd like to try we can all talk about our, feelings about the fair. My family lore is that before 2019 repainting of the Space Needle, it was my grandpa that painted it last time. So you didn't know why, because he died in 2008, so you wouldn't have been able to ask him, but that's our family lore. That and going through a tornado warning in the dairy barn when I was there for the Dare Parade in 5th grade. But, State Fair is a big deal. I want it to happen, and not just because my children might disown me if it doesn't. I agree that it probably makes sense for us to have a partnership with the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office. So I'm willing to explore it. But I do think, as Commissioner Mattis-Castillo said, I hope it's in the framework of how do we do something in the short term that protects our interests, because we do have an obligation to our community to ensure we aren't putting them at risk. Because even if things haven't happened in the past, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So we have to be really thoughtful about that and the amount of risk we're willing to take on for the community. And so answering questions about how much liability the State Fair can take, how much is up to us, I think are really important. We need those details. And part of that might be just what is the timeline of this arrangement? Are we looking to do something short-term through the fair this year, and then maybe a longer engagement process to look for years ahead? I would be more comfortable with that, particularly because it doesn't feel like we have a lot of time for the due diligence and evaluation that I'd prefer on the rate. I know it's indicated that we're using the standard rate. I would really love to get a commitment or a conversation with the sheriff about what does that rate look like, not just for a contract with the State Fair, but all of our contract cities, to ensure that the rate is equitable and fair across all communities, and that we're making intentional decisions in those pricing structures. I'm glad to hear that there is a backup pool of 30 officers from the state, but as much as the fair is in Ramsey County, it is a regional. It's statewide, and I would love to hear more about other policing agencies stepping up and committing to this process and how that would work, which I know takes more engagement on already a tight timeline. But the last 2 weeks of the summer are a really hard time to take off of work. A lot of child care providers for school-age children don't operate during those 2 weeks, so you have officers who have had a very challenging year with a lot of emergencies where they haven't had time off. We have finally an opportunity for families to take vacations. We have a lot of demand for, preschool physicals before kids go back to school. So that's a lot of family burden. So asking our deputies not to take time off during that period. I really hope that we can consider the hiring needs and what partnership could happen to make this happen in the future. So with that, getting to those nitty-gritty details, really my question is, what's been done in the last week since that letter Ryan sent on our behalf on June 15th to form this working group and resolve these concerns and develop the necessary joint powers agreement to make this an official partnership through the fair? Who else has been brought into this process so that we can get to an agreement that lets us have the fair this year in a way that protects all of our interests, because we all want the fair to happen. We want it to happen safely, and that means both in terms of the physical safety that will be provided by our Ramsey County deputies, but also in terms of the risk that we're taking on as a board. So I'd really like to hear more about where have we gone, what are the next steps for the working group to build on the issues that we want to hear more about that were outlined in the agenda.
Yep. Scott, we've looked at, right from the get-go, the dispatcher agreement now, the agreement where we share information, the whole communications thing, and using that as a model. And exactly where that's at, I'm not sure, because there are questions that need to be answered. As far as the time of year being tough, we see that as well, hiring our own staff. And vendors and commercial exhibitors and competitive exhibitors all face the same kind of thing at that time of year. So, and Scott, when we did talk about, I think it was our very first conversation, May 27th, about using that existing agreement as a model moving forward. Oh, you also asked about longer term. Absolutely. I think what we need to do now, because of the compressed time frame, the same thing we're doing with every facet of the fair, is get things in place, make sure they're all done correctly, answer everybody's questions, take care of everybody's concerns, and get through this year. And then when we have a little bit of time after we've had that 1 year, one fair experience, then look at improving it and putting something together for long term.
I just, out of curiosity, can you tell us what the rationale was for not maintaining your own police force as been work? I guess that's lingering in the background. Was there a fear? What was the reason for that?
if there was a clear successor, if there was someone who could take it on with a team ready to go, hit the ground running, and start assembling all of the elements, then that would have been an option, but there wasn't. Without the right person, and the right person is out there, I'm sure, we didn't have time. Further, seeing what's done at other fairs, seeing what would be best for us, and because we've been so closely allied with the Ramsey County Sheriff's Department, regardless, that made the most sense.
So just a logistic question. Isn't there a way to lend them one of the deputies to take over as a successor this year, and it would save us all this headache?
Well, that's not a yes or no. That could be an
I'm just,
let's put that one in the hopper.
That can be a,
right, okay,
Go ahead, Mary Jo.
just trying to solve
Thank
the
you.
problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I know we're going to hear from the Sheriff's Office, so we can let Jerry share some of these questions. But Jerry, good to see you. We've known each other for almost our whole lives since I grew up in Falcon Heights, across the street from the fair, and just want to put it on the record, I love the fair. I think there's no stronger supporter of the fair than me, and I'm really grateful for the conversations that are to come with our partnership here, because I have always felt that I should go to you, but clearly the board, wants to have a stronger relationship with the fair, and I'm happy that this will produce that. But I appreciate everything that you have done to produce this amazing, event in our state. I share with my colleagues have already talked about is just some of the issues that we have in our fiduciary duty to our residents of Ramsey County, and you, I know, understand that. And so they revolve around a liability and the work that's been done. And I know we can talk about options. I think in the short term that the prudent thing for us to think about is go to the state for the short term, but then come to us and think about long term, where we can work out some of these. But it is a Minnesota State Fair. I think that they are actually in a better position to handle a really quick thing like this, because it's coming up in, oh my gosh, a few months. And I'm surprised actually that our Sheriff's Department can actually take this on, because there's so many things that we're asking. I mean, they have so many things to do on behalf of the county that I can't imagine they have time to do all of this. This is a whole nother huge undertaking. So I hate to put that on our sheriffs, the workers in our sheriff's office. And so I do have some concerns about it, but there's never a concern that we love the fair. There's never a concern that we want the fair to continue, that we want people to be safe, that we want there to have have public safety be taken care of at the fair. That's never in question here. But I think how that happens is what we're here to discuss. But thank you so much for being here.
Jerry, I have a question for you. So under this proposal, the Ramsey County Sheriff would be the lead agency, enforcement. Yes. And then you stated that they would be supplemented.
Yes.
Who would supplement them?
Licensed officers from other agencies.
Officially or non? How does that work operationally? When you say other police officers?
Licensed officers from other agencies, correct.
And who pays them?
The fair.
So that
the administrative stuff, perhaps Sheriff Fletcher could get in more how that would work.
So is it still under the one contract to the county that those people will be paid for, or those separate contracts?
It's whatever would be most efficient and work best.
How did you do it in the past with your own police? You had supplemental folks then.
Yes, we did.
And then how did you do it then?
They were state fair employees, so it was through state fair payroll.
The supplemental people were state
Yes.
fair? Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions? Well, thank you. I guess we should have Bob come up, huh? You can stay where you are. We might need you.
I don't know if I want to go back. I do have a handout I just want to pass out here before we start. Mr. Chair, is it okay if I open up with a couple comments?
Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, thank you for the discussion. Everything that's been said here, we have discussed internally at the Sheriff's Office as well. All these issues are great issues, they're important issues, and the issue of liability, of holding the county taxpayers whole, making them whole, all those are very important issues. And I don't begrudge anything that was said today. I just wish I was up here first, Jerry. And actually, Jerry and I have never met before, just recently as well. So we don't have a long-term relationship either, but I've always admired the way that he runs the fair. I do just want to talk a little bit about the timeline, because I know there are concerns about sharing of information. We didn't know for sure that Paul Paulus was going to retire until he finally put it in writing on May 18th. We were contacted by him on May 6th saying he was planning to retire, and that we met with the fair, Mr. Brian Hudella, his other deputy general manager, on the 10th. But there was a possibility Paul was going to extend his time there. In fact, I encouraged him to. I said, Paul, it would be good if you encouraged, because, this is fast track for us to be able to close this gap. His father was in ill health. Probably many of you know his father passed away. And he just really struggled with whether he should or not. And he decided on the 18th, no, I'm gone. Well, we met that same day, our second meeting with the fair, and that was May 18th. And we knew then that, okay, we had better get going and develop some type of plan that could address this. And when I say the word plan, from our perspective, in the business we're in, our number one priority was ensuring that the 2 million plus people that would come there would be safe. The 200,000 that would come at one time would not be a victim of any type of activity. So when we started building a plan on May 18th, it was with a priority of safety. Were we concerned about liability and finances? Absolutely. But we only wanted to get into this if we could ensure the people that were coming there were safe. We didn't make a decision on the 18th of May that we were going to do this. We had a lot of groundwork and a lot of meetings internally to figure out what this would take. Someone asked the question, how can the Sheriff's Office do this? How do we make sure that we don't impact other services? I can tell you today, the plan that we have does not impact any of our services, contract city or otherwise, because it's built upon overtime. 50 of our 500 employees working overtime every day. We have no intention of canceling medical appointments. I've read that email myself. Rest assured, if a person doesn't want to work the fair, don't work the fair. We have 20 plus that work there already every year that love coming to the fair and working the fair. So I think there's fear out there. I understand that in terms of the employees. But if you read that letter long enough, you'll see that really what it comes down to is the request for more money. And we always think the deputies deserve more money, just for different reasons than I articulated in that email. So let me just kind of go over a little bit about the plan, because I think there's some question as to how this would be done. Are you interested in hearing a little more about that? So we met with Paul Paulus, the chief, and we looked at how many officers they had in the past, and that would range from 135 to 160. And so, but he said, based upon the increasing violence and the coverage that was necessary, we really think we need to have 200. 200 every day that would essentially work 8-hour shifts. Some would work 10 that would overlap, et cetera. And so the question is, how do you come up with 200 police officers? Well, we know that in the past they've been able to recruit about 100 from outside agencies. And so we believe that we can recruit 100 from other agencies. We've put out invitations to apply, et cetera. At this point, we have 40 that are interested, that we've vetted, we believe are quality individuals. We believe that 50 of our employees can work overtime. That's really 1/10 of our staffing. We have a commitment from the commissioner and the Colonel Langer, who I talked to today, to send 30 state troopers to man or person the gates. And Sheriff Hutchinson assured us he will send 20. So the deputies that we have, of course, are our employees, continue to be, always have been. And the 100 that we're targeting to bring in from other agencies would become temporary employees of the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office. They would be under our rules, they would wear our body cameras, we would supervise them, et cetera. We would train them. We have a day worth of training that they've assured us, and they would comply with all Ramsey County rules. So for 150 of the people there, they would be Ramsey County guided. The state troopers would adopt their own agreement with the fair, and they would be specific to the gates. In Hennepin County, we're searching for the right mission for the 20 deputies from Hennepin County. But that really totals up to 200. A massive undertaking. Time is short. I'm not as old as everybody here, but I'm older than most of you, and I am an expert on time. It goes very, very fast. And so we have set out to move very quickly to make this happen. We knew from the beginning that this fair agreement would need to come to you, but we wanted to package it up in a way that we're comfortable with it before we present it to you. This was actually mentioned in our budget hearing on May 19th. It was talked about that we were discussing with the fair. And as you saw, there was an article that KSTP did talking about the chief retiring and us a possibility. But the time from May 18th to May 28th, that's only 10 days. We were working feverishly to get a plan together that could actually work. We could have said, like others have said, no, Jerry, we can't do it. But in my mind, here's where I'm at. My daughter, Kelsey, as long as we're telling family stories, will be down here. She's down here today with her 4 children, my 4 grandchildren, and my 15-year-old son, who comes the first day every year with my wife. I want to know they're safe. I want to know that we're doing everything in our power to keep this level of violence that's everywhere else in society, not just here, around the country. If you watch CNN News, the mass shootings and the violence is everywhere in this country. I want to know that we're doing everything we can, knowing that there's a possibility, but that we're going to be better than ever because, frankly, we do a good job at the Sheriff's Office. And as he talked about the right team, we have a team that can help produce quality law enforcement. Now, cost-wise, let me just get to cost, we'll get to liability. And by the way, this question didn't get answered, but there are a number of attorneys in the back room here.
Wait a minute, Bob, I don't want to talk to attorneys. Just
No,
answer
no.
the cost question.
No, but
Let's talk about the cost question.
I just want to say the question about who's working on it, and Commissioner Fredheim asked that question. There's been a team of attorneys meeting since Ryan's letter was sent out to discuss how this is going to be. Building a joint powers agreement, working about liability, discussing the question of there's 5 liabilities. Could the state do it? Could the county insurance trust? Could the League of Cities? Do we go with self-insured and raise the premium, or do we go to an outside broker? All of those conversations are taking place.
Well, you know what, Bob? I think and what we want to do here today is sort of get a good sense of how to move forward, right?
Yeah.
All those questions, they could go.
I'm with
We
you,
could
but
get we could get a team together. There are a lot of questions that
Let
need
me
to be answered.
let me get to your questions then, numbers-wise. Cost-wise, we're using the $80 per hour fee that is set by the county for a security services fee. That's where we got that from. That fee more than covers a deputy on overtime with benefits, which even at the highest step deputy on overtime with the benefits is still $75. If we have temporary employees, those temporary employees are going to earn far less than that because they don't have benefits and or likely not overtime. So I'm here to tell you that the plan will vary. However, the estimated extra revenue for the county is somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000 because we're actually charging the fair slightly more than what we are paying out. So there will be an excess in funds, and there's no reason to believe that target isn't totally achievable.
So Bob, could I ask you a
Yeah,
question?
yeah.
Just, so out of the 200 deputies, 50 are gonna be state troopers?
30.
30, I'm sorry, 30. The rest would be hired as Ramsey County.
20 from Hennepin County, which we're proposing they have an agreement with the fair as well. And so then 50 of ours and then 100 that we would hire as temporary.
Okay, and then those 100 would come under our contract, the contract that we have with the state fair.
That's correct.
And that math you just ran me would cover those expenses.
Yes.
So then with the Hennepin County and the state, those would be two separate contracts, not by Ramsey County,
Correct.
but by the state fair,
Correct.
completely and separate from us.
And not unusual, the fair has a contract with the security companies. There are 3 security companies working the gates. They have a contract for metal detection. They do a number of independent contracts as well.
Okay. So what we're talking about under the Ramsey County contract would be roughly about 150
Correct.
total.
Correct. $80 per
And
hour.
that's what that contract would cover.
That's right. We've billed it out as 200, but knowing that there would be a reduction if the state troopers came in, which they have now, and Hennepin County has come in as well.
Okay, Nicole, I'll go down the line, then Victoria.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for clarifying the $80 an hour. That's really helpful. That was one of my questions. So the 2 additional questions I have, with the additional officers, is there a need to purchase more body cameras? And if so, how will that cost be covered? And then how will after the fact accounting be presented so that we can just confirm that the coverage is there and that that rate is right for us?
Great questions. First on body cameras, we have talked to Taser International, and they have agreed to lend us those at no cost. Because we have a good relationship with them, and we're about to switch out to purchase some new upgrades in any case. So we will be able to have cameras on each of them. Other questions, sorry.
So the other question is what sort of accounting is being built in for after the fact, just so I love
Right.
hearing that there should be excess.
Right.
That's what we want. But after the fact, what's the plan for just an auditing or accounting to make sure that's the case?
I think after the fact is important, but I know in Ryan's letter, he discussed that a meeting needs to take place with Alex in order to make sure she believes our numbers are there. I think we've estimated conservatively. I'm sure that she will find those, but Alex Maested, who's here, is a great numbers person, and he works closely with Alex. I'm sure the 2 of those could agree on what the final numbers are.
Great.
And we don't have any objection to analyzing our plan at the current time either. It's just that it's been a changing in terms of the mix as to how many would come in and how many would not.
Great, for now. Yeah.
Victoria?
Thank you. Well, and I guess, again, one of the issues is with not having an agreement or a contract and finding out. I mean, we found out basically 2 days before it went into effect. So, I mean, something went into effect without us even really knowing about it. It went into effect on June 1st, correct?
General patrol duties went into effect on June 1st. I don't dispute that there could be an argument about the level of liability and risk for that. I will say, though, that I'm very familiar with all the things we do, and that liability of general patrol duties is very, very slim inside the gated areas of the fair. As Trista pointed out, it's not really very accessible. So I made the decision that general patrol duties, we would absorb that. And it's part of our internal tort liability. If we have extra bodies working there, our rates should be raised. And I think that's the appropriate way. Now, having said that, would I prefer to have a JPA on June 1st? Absolutely. And as we meet, our attorneys are working on a retroactive JPA that would go back to June 1st as well. We're not opposed to that. We always thought it was best. I guess as we looked at the situation they were in with Paul's retirement and COVID and not knowing whether the fair was going on, we had to make a decision. What will it look like at the fair if for back to the 50s, the Jewel Show, the vaccinate. We secure the vaccination clinics offered by Ramsey County Public Health as well. All I can tell you is that we have a past practice at the sheriff's office of doing just what we did there, of charging $80 an hour. We have done it for dozens of entities that have asked us for that service based upon the fee that you set. And so we felt while it would be better to have that JPA, that we were willing to go onto that ground just to keep things moving without the fair crumbling.
So, well, a couple of things, and I guess clearly we need to have the questions, as Chair Ortega pointed out. We'll be able to work through those, I'm sure, and if there are any additional costs, then whatever comes out in the agreement has to be adjusted. And you know, given the fact that we stepped in early, I would hope that the state fair would be willing to work with us on that if, in fact, the $80 an hour isn't enough. The added and the liability, and right now, you know, inside the gates, hopefully we can get something worked out here pretty quickly, because I do have concern about our employees.
Yeah.
Because it's Ramsey County employees under not a contract, and whether or not, if something happened, and I'm not worried about damage to a vehicle, I'm worried about damage to a human being, and what would happen, and whether or not they would fall under our the protection that they have as employees for Ramsey County, I think is in question here because of the ambiguity of it. And so I think that that has to be resolved pretty quickly, and then for the state fair itself, we have more time to deal with that, because it will be different, I guess. But the accounting side of this, I mean, I'm sure that you're working very well with Alex, but we need to have complete transparency. A dime goes in, a dime comes out, and if there's a dime goes whatever, and we end up with an extra nickel, then we want to know where that nickel is.
We want a lot of nickels. We want a lot of nickels. And
well,
actually,
and that's
Krista
fine.
told me, make sure you get a lot of nickels. Remember that?
A lot more.
Well, and the fact of the matter is, you know, this isn't about the money and about making money. It's about public safety. It's about the people of Ramsey County and those that are visiting Ramsey County. It's about the state fair. All of the same things. We have the same goals here.
Yeah.
But the lack of that 10 days, if there hadn't been any communication even in those 10 days, it would have been nice, so that we weren't surprised. And I think, you know, as an elected official, getting surprises is not a good thing, especially when you're talking about a whole lot of money and services and employees and the confusion that came out of that. But that's hindsight, and that's always 20/20.
Well, it is a little hindsight, but it wasn't Jerry's fault.
No.
It was totally on me. You mentioned that, but
I did.
Just for the record, totally on me.
I did that because I knew it was on you, so there. So the accounting side of it is going to be incredibly important, especially, again, as budget chair. I mean, we've had some issues in the past, and we need to correct that, and we're not going into this without that pretty plainly up front. So the bottom line here is, when we're working on this, I like the idea of doing a short-term agreement that gets us through the fair. But all of these other issues, we need to have people sharpening their pencils. We need the lawyers in the room, and I'm not one either, so I want to make sure that all of this is covered, our insurance, the liability, all of these things. So we get what we need to, that's the most that I would consider, is an agreement that gets us through the state fair. And I don't know how other people feel about that, but I think getting through the state fair makes the most sense, and work on the rest of it while that's happening, so that it's not just a boom.
Just because I know the attorneys are listening to what you're saying, would it be okay that the agreements work through the end of the year? Because as soon as the fair is done, they're going to be scrambling to have services, and they'd have time to find an alternative.
You know what, Bob? Let's wait till we hear from the rest of the board, and we'll come to our conclusions. Go ahead, Jim. You're next.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I tested the water to see if we could have made this short and just sent Mr. Hammer back to Mr. Harrington to figure this out. I don't get the sense that we want to do that, right? I get the sense that people want to put their best foot forward to figure it out.
Well, hold on a minute. It's a good question. I mean, I've been trying to get to the substance of things, you know?
All right, I won't take it off the table.
Yes.
We can leave that for,
Right.
but here's a couple of things I want to talk to the sheriff.
Yes, sir.
So, Commissioner Reinhardt's raised the issue about the liability and the safety for our employees. I really want to focus in on the impact on our employees and their family, right? And, I've seen the email, right? Forced overtime, cancellation of medical appointments, dental appointments. I've heard from the judges already about, the impact. We heard some things about transportation to the hospital this weekend during the Back 50s show, and how we're going to manage and operate this. We've already got some disagreements about budget and how it's managed. And I don't want to exasperate this or have this as an opportunity for you or for us to be able to exasperate that. So I think there needs to be some really clear cut expectations and accountability to both you and to this county board about the impact to our employees, and to ensure that that's real, that come those 11 days of the fair, folks that want to go on vacation still can go on vacation, because you talked about in the past we had 20 that signed up for this, and that's great. But I also know some of those 20 actually took their vacation or time off so they could spend their time at the fair.
Correct.
So I really think it's not just a formal agreement, JPA, liability insurance, but the impact it has on our employees, but then also the impact on the rest of your operation that you have responsibility for. Not leaving them shorthanded at the jail, not using correctional officers where you should have deputies. All those things need to be managed, but they need to be managed within a budget that's already been approved. And I think the worst thing for both you and us would be, come December, you're back before us saying, I'm 1.5 million over, and all the fair sucked these resources out, and I had to put people over here and put people over here. And I want to hear from you before December that's not going to happen.
We might be over, but the judge hasn't ruled in our other matter yet, so we don't know what that number will be over. But let me say that, first of all, you're concerned about the employees. Thank you very much. I hope that any sheriff anywhere in the country is as concerned about his employees as any other elected body. We are definitely concerned. There are rumors going around in terms of work. We're not interested in having people working at the fair if they can't put a smile on their face. We want the Jerry Hammer smile at the fair door with all of our deputies as well. It's just it doesn't work if you don't. So I'm quite confident that we can work the fair. I mean, I promise you, no one's canceling medical appointments. The people that took vacation, they took there to work there. They still want to work there because they're going to earn overtime. It's a good deal for a lot of people to work overtime. So, but regarding the money, we'll have strict accounting of the fair money, and I know that if there's $200,000 to $300,000 excess, it's your decision where that money goes. It's not up to us. Now, we'll make a recommendation, and we will ask that it be applied to any shortages, which we could have, which on occasion we've been known to have. But in terms of the fair, we definitely are going to have excess revenue. So.
Go ahead, Jim.
Quick follow-up. I appreciate that, and I appreciate your willingness to say that here. Again, just going back, in the past, 20 of your employees or our employees have, signed up to participate. Now you're proposing 50, so that's 30 more that, and in relative size of your force, that's a small percentage, but it's still 30 that we've got to figure out. Do we have 30 that want to go with a smile on their face and they're willing to raise their hand and be a part of that and still not impact the rest of the organization?
Yes, we do. And a part of that 50, we are going to mix in the concept of ambassadors. We think that one of the weaknesses of the fair is that there aren't enough faces of color, both running the fair or in the law enforcement. So we have identified employees that are not sworn officers that will be walking with and working with our sworn in an ambassador role, similar to what St. Paul does with ambassadors and what Danny Gibbons is trying to work on. So we're going to bring another dimension to this fair, and we want those people to be able to intervene. If there's little gang squabbles or kids that are arguing, we want an early intervention. So we're going to bring some people that aren't all sworn to the mix. We're still going to charge them our $80 per hour, mind you, but we need to have some people of color and some racial equity looks of the sheriff's office when we're there as well.
Trista?
Thank you, Sheriff, and thanks for entertaining our questions because we haven't had the longevity or the knowledge behind the scenes. And so I want to go back to my earlier question. If the reason the fair is moving to a different law enforcement is because they didn't have someone in line ready to step up, you have 12 very seasoned chief deputies. You got a lineup behind you. How come we didn't consider detailing someone over to the fair and let it run as is?
Well, we're never opposed to that, but knowing what it takes to stand up an organization, keep in mind, here's a couple things that happened. It's been 2 years since there was a fair, so many of the state fair and temporary ones have either retired, gone away. Okay. In the meantime, Chief Paulus decided that the training files of some of those employees weren't up to snuff. And if you read in the newspaper, you know, essentially he terminated them all and told them they had to reapply. Because there are a lot of post requirements and the same concerns that we have in terms of diversity training, less lethal training. So he wanted them to prove that they had all that training. And so where the organization was left after a 2-year hiatus wasn't, in our opinion, any place that one person could overcome. As a matter of fact, I called Brooke Blakey and I said, Brooke, this is between the 10th and the 18th, I said, would you like the job? If you want the job, we'll stand down and not do anything. She says, no, Bob, I don't want the job. I would appreciate it if my dad's name stayed on the police department, but I do not want the job. So we had a person in our place, Ron Naflo, who was our commander that we intend to be the primary. We asked him, do you want the job? He says, no, it can't be done without some significant backup. So, you know, on the short term, Ashley Bryant, Ashley, raise your hand right there. She's one of our commanders. She's working on the personnel issues closely with Scott and others and Eldona. And the state fair is paying for her salary right now. So in order to bring this up to speed, it takes a little extra staffing to get it where it needs to go. And, you know, it's a big job.
Yeah. Thank you. I do have a follow-up, Mr. Chair, if that's right. Okay, so that option's off the table. Thank you for giving me that history. My other question is, so these 100 temps that you're bringing in from other agencies, you know, part of the reason, so I'm from Morrison County. Right. I grew up at I prefer the small fair than the state fair. That's just me because I don't like great crowds. But what I did like when I did come to the state fair is to see a local Morrison County deputy there because it felt like home at the state fair. But now you're going to ask those deputies to put on a Ramsey County uniform. And I think that part of the statewide effect is to have people from all over the county. So if you're from Renville and you see your local guy there, you feel at home. And so what's your idea behind that?
I agree 100% with what you just said. And if we can get the legislature to pass a law, an exemption for us in the next 2 weeks, before the end of the year, we could do that. Unfortunately, the law that gave the state fair the right to do that is different for us as a sheriff's office. The statute requires that all sheriffs have brown. Police officers are blue, troopers are maroon. So we're required to dress in some form of brown. But we're concerned about that as well. We're trying to figure out whether we could get by with a smaller Ramsey County pin and allow them to have their Morrison County sheriff's uniform on. We're digging into all that. We would love to have the blue uniforms, but we don't think it's legal for us to allow them to wear their own blue stuff.
Would this come down to, thank you for letting me go down this path a little bit, so previously Mr. Hammer said that each of those officers from those other agencies were employees of the state fair. Is there a reason why we can't continue to run it through as employees of the state fair? And that would also lessen this burden of indemnification if we kept the same model, but we managed the system, so to speak.
I think next year we could probably get some language in statute to allow us to to figure out a way to do that. I don't think it's technically legal right now, and here's the reason. The expectations of police departments and police chiefs in today's environment is very high. And so you have to have a police chief. The police chief has to have certain qualifications, and then the police department has to have a whole list of qualifications that they would need to do on their own. Training, firearm training. We've brought these people in, they're using our firearm range. So I like that model better, but we haven't been able to figure out a way that we could keep the best of the state fair model and supplement it. And then, of course, if something does go wrong, who's really in charge? As it is now, if something goes wrong, it's on me. And, you know, if the fair had half of the fair, well, it's on them, you know. So does that make any sense? Or?
It does. I just wonder why it wouldn't be solved with a joint powers agreement with those other agencies, you know, essentially them detailing their officer to you, but that they're still their officer.
Well, doing 80 joint powers agreements might be difficult.
This whole thing is difficult.
Yeah.
Great.
Exactly.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Sheriff.
To this point, but there are 40, or whatever number that is, of Hennepin County deputies that are
20.
employees. 20, okay. And there are 30 state patrol who are under them.
Agreements haven't been inked yet, but that's the intention, yes.
Okay, so do the Hennepin County deputies then, do they have to put on a different uniform?
Not under that scenario, but if they say Washington County sends 5 and they come work for us, that's the question. We've purchased polo shirts, a soft attire, a soft look for them to put on that have sheriff's thing. We wouldn't care what color pants, their overgear that they wear, but somewhere it needs to say Ramsey County Sheriff. Now, if Hennepin has its own joint powers agreement, then they would be able to maintain their own uniform. But the timeline for agencies to get these joint powers is short. So, but we didn't think it made sense to do it for one from one agency. You got something coming from Danube, from Clearwater. We might never get there, especially since they never had to do that in the past.
Okay, so it's the numbers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And
Mary Jo.
my questions were along the same lines. I was going to ask why the fair couldn't just hire these 100 extra officers. And you're telling me there's too many joint powers agreements, although I'm not thinking that's too many. I'm nervous about them wearing the Ramsey County uniform, even though you're going to give them training. Then now I don't know, I'm going to ask our lawyers who know this way better than me, the liability. And we know that anyone can, regardless of what agreements are made, anybody can sue anybody for anything.
Of course.
So regardless of what we put in our agreement, in our contract, we're gonna get sued for anything that happens at the fair if they're wearing a sheriff's outfit
everybody's getting sued.
that says
The
Ramsey
fair,
County,
everybody.
that says Ramsey County.
My name will be
We're
on the
getting
top,
it, right.
though. My name's always
Doesn't
on the
matter,
top.
right, doesn't matter. What's in the agreement over here? So now we got 100 people.
But Mary Jo,
Now we got 100 officers who are great officers, you know, but.
For 12 days.
For 12 days,
12 days.
and with thousands and thousands and thousands of people.
But look at the track record of the fair.
I
It's
know,
very good.
I'm very happy
Very
about
good.
that.
Very
But
good.
I'm just looking at this risk.
Yeah, I get
And
that.
so, yeah, so
Let me say this
I'm
on
still
the
concerned
part-time
about
thing.
that.
We hire part-time officers on a regular basis. Most of the people that you see when you come in out of the building are part-timers that we've hired from St. Paul when they retired. We vet them. We only want the best ones here. So it's not unusual for us to hire part-time officers. And we hire part-timers for lakes and trails too. So it's not a practice that we're unaccustomed to. But I guess that really does come down to this. You raised the issue about something happening at the fair, even though it has a great track record. All right? We can all imagine some bad things happening at the fair. Believe me, that's what I do for a living. All right? I studied terrorism for 8 years when I was off on hiatus after my lost the election. But so I think about this on a regular basis. But you have to think about this question. What if we don't do it? What if we don't provide the highest quality service possible and someone else tries to throw something together and then there's a problem? Yes, we won't have the legal liability, but we'll have that what if haunting us for quite some time. So that's why I'm at where I'm at.
I'm there with you. Then I'm going to go back to Jim's very first question, which was, I'm very confident in Chief John Harrington. I'm very confident in his capabilities as a public safety commissioner. And I'm happy to have him think about that and have it be a statewide liability. Believe me, we all know in Ramsey County that we get burdened with a lot of state expense and the state issues, when I think the whole state should help pay for this.
Right.
So I actually think there should be a liability for the state. We all hope nothing happens, and we want
Right.
the best policy, the best public safety there, but I want the liability to flow to the state. And I actually do have confidence in our state public safety. And if we decide after this year, because this is all really fast, that this is something we do want to take on, we have a lot more time to deal with it. So I get it that we're doing it until the fair, but for the fair,
Well, let me answer the John Harrington question. It's still floating around, Jim. Number one, John Harrington is of the opinion that the statute does not allow them to provide primary police service anywhere, that the mandate for state troopers is narrower than general police officers. And so they've taken the position that they can't do that. The only reason I could coax them into the gates is because it's a trunk highway. Snelling is a trunk highway, and there's some relationship to the trunk highway, and they can do some traffic safety education as well. But here's the bigger problem for the state fair. They are swamped with line 3 requests. They're sending bodies up there, and they're going to continue to send them all summer. And I cajoled them to the 30. Trust me, at first we were starting with we'll send you 2, then we'll send you 4. And finally, the letter to the governor freed up the 30. But they do not have any staff to help us anywhere down here because of what's happening in northern Minnesota.
well, we could, Mr. Chair, we could give them some of our staff under their contract, and we could, bring in a few more from out state. I just think it's a statewide responsibility for this risk, is my issue.
Well, on the risk issue, number one, there are private brokers that have been consulted and are willing to provide insurance in the millions for a certain amount. Secondly, I think the fair is willing to pay more for more insurance from my conversations with them, and the $200,000 to $300,000 that I know we're going to reap, that could be applied to some form of additional workers' comp liability coverage as well. I think Ryan's team with Scott can figure out those details. That's the bottom line. Whether we agree that the sheriff should have started on June 1st, let's just pretend that didn't happen. And let's just pretend
We're not going to do that.
And it's agree to disagree, but let's just figure out, can we pull it off for the fair? And if anybody can do it, Ryan O'Connor can do it.
I just have one more question, and then I'll stop. But just a question on, okay, so if this happens and the body cams are there and everything's happening, the data that's recovered, that's on all those cameras, does that stay with the fair then, or does it stay with us?
Us.
It's with us?
Yes, sheriff's office.
Just curious about that, okay. Thank you.
Okay, I have Tony.
Thank you. Certainly, the liability is a foregone conclusion. Yeah. I believe that we can work it out. It's thrust upon us to do so. Thank you very much, Sheriff. I also will say that I know
there's no water up there.
Others have been asked and have refused to step up to the plate. So, you did it without coming forward and sharing with us what you were doing. We're thankful that we are able to see this before us, to work it out in retrospect, to ensure that we have the protections that we need to. And there's a lot of work that has to happen after this table discussion today. That said, I do understand why there was a state fair police department. All of the issues of coordination that have to happen, all of the multiple players that will be there, even as you speak, the Ramsey County Sheriff's Department, Hennepin County, certainly the state. You mentioned before in a conversation that we had, Metro Council. There are a number of players, and you know quite better than I do that with law enforcement being in the moment so often, responding and reacting, it takes a lot of thought to make sure that we are able to get it right for our residents, for the people who are working for us in those roles. So this is going to be, I think, not a simple thing to work out. The questions about who takes on the majority of the coordination, I think, are still to be aired out. We've got all these departments coming. We've got all these people coming. We've got issues of uniform, of researching whose policies we're abiding by, training you brought up. And all of these folks, of course, will need some level of training. We're fortunate that we've had a state fair police department in the past to do that. You're taking on the role that they had for all of that coordination. So again, I respect that you could step up and say, I can do this. We will share with you the responsibility to identify how that is done because we have the liability as a board for the work that is happening now, for the work that will happen for the state fair. Commissioner Reinhardt brought up a short-term agreement. And when I heard short-term agreement to get us through the fair, I thought, oh, that's not a short-term agreement, not in this context, because there is so much to have happen to identify what that agreement, and you are correct. It should likely be a short-term agreement, but it doesn't have to be quick. It can't be quick and dirty, It
That's
has,
not what I meant.
Right, that's not what you meant. So it will require a lot of work from this time of this meeting to have the joint powers agreement that is an intergovernmental agreement to determine if it includes just the county, the sheriff, and the state fair, or if there are other parties who should be a part of it, who are taking on that work and can be a part of that coordination. So I would raise that question, that we air that out as we look to move forward in making that agreement. It may be that there are others who should shoulder this responsibility and coordination. I go back to your question, Commissioner McDonough, and I don't think we're done asking that question. Clearly, we can't spend a month figuring that out. But I do think we need to make sure with our attorneys, since there are other people there, since there are other organizations who are doing this work, and this concept of coordination and where does one step in and the other leave off? We're at the gates, we're in the park, we're in the transportation lot, we're around the gates, and there are so many people there. Clearly, you've done this kind of work before with jurisdictional responsibility, and you have an understanding, too, of the handshaking that happens. But there are many questions, whose policies, where, how do we work through this together? So who should that lead be? Should it in fact be defined and confirmed as our sheriff? Should it be somewhere else? Have we, in fact, because the state has said they cannot do the patrol work, have we concluded that they cannot have the responsibility for the agreement?
I don't know the answer to that. I believe that they have concluded that. I think what should happen is we should try to do it the way it's proposed this year, learn what we can, and at the end of the fair, if we choose not to do it again next year, tell Mr. Hammer that he's going to have to go back to Plan A and find a new police chief for 2022. And I say that because I'm concerned about making sure the safety plan is solid. And if we don't get concurrence from the board that you want us to do it, it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to invest another 6 weeks in doing what needs to be done. So I will tell you that in terms of handoffs, the St. Paul Police Department has their own joint powers agreement with the fair as well for everything outside. So the St. Paul Police Department does traffic. we're hoping there'll be a joint powers for the state patrol at the gates, and we would be inside. So it isn't really that strange when you think about it. You have an entity that has a lot, 320 acres, what is it? 320 acres, and they're trying to deliver a state fair as the best way they possibly can, and reportedly it's the best state fair in the country. And so they contract out with security companies, metal detectors, St. Paul to do the outside. They even contracted with us 2 years ago to do traffic on Larpenteur. We had a $25,000 agreement, if you will, service agreement without a document there 2 years ago. So what they're doing is what they do to keep their business moving. And by the way, they do a pretty good job of it. I gotta say, they do a pretty good job of managing all these balls that they're juggling. So.
One final comment. With so many agencies, we've talked about 4 joint powers agreements now,
Yep.
and all being made with one organization. I do want to ask that the question be responded to. Could that be one joint powers agreement with duties and responsibilities of those various agencies spelled out with the liability going to that one agency?
They'll have to ask those smart people in the back of the room.
I'll put that on the table for a question to be responded to as we work through after this table.
I have a few more, but I do want to start wrapping things up. Jim?
Yep. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Sheriff, you're a really smart guy. And I don't doubt for a moment that the public safety piece that you're talking about is real. But there's also, it's real for Commissioner Harrington, and it's real for a lot of people that work in this field. And, the more I listen to this conversation, and the more I get a better understanding, because this is the first time we've really been able to have an actual conversation where we get feedback and responses, the more I'm convinced that there needs to be greater ownership in solving this issue that you have in front of you right now. And it needs to be greater than this board. And it needs to be the state, needs to be a part of that. You raised the issue of Harrington, Commissioner Harrington suggesting they can't provide policing services. Well, that's a problem to be solved, but the legislature's in session right now. They're pretty good at passing legislation when they need, and that brings them in to helping solve a problem for our great state get-together, right? And a part of that could be legislation that actually solves some of the other problems that you might have in front of you rather than piecemeal here. But another thing we haven't talked about too much, it's been touched on. We look backwards, and Mr. Hammer, you talked about the history here and not much for incidences, and Sheriff, you've referenced the history. The fact is, we've seen activism right to the gates of the fair the last time. And with the climate we have now, I would not be surprised if that activism and that civil unrest does not find its way into the fair this time. It's an opportunity for folks that really don't feel like their voices have been heard to get a strong opportunity for that. And I truly believe that we need a stronger ownership, not only of solving your problem, but what happens during the 11 days of that fair. It can't just fall on you as one individual that has this responsibility. In the end, anything that comes back to this board and the taxpayers of Ramsey County. And I think the effort of getting to yes, clearly you think this is a good idea, and solving to yes is solving those problems. But I think getting to yes needs to be broader than this table, and I think it needs to be a sense of urgency for the governor, for the legislature, for the Commissioner of Public Safety to step up with partners like you to solve an issue that's right here, and we've got 2 months to do it. But it needs to be more than just Scott and our team doing the problem solving here, and having the responsibility for the end result of that problem solving. And the faster we try to solve problems, the more we have potential for mistakes or gaffes or the potential for harm. So I would propose the opposite. Let's bring in the legislature. Let's get this thing solved for this year that way, and give us a year to have, long term, does it make sense for the host county to have some responsibility in that? but give us that year to figure that out and bring in the other partners to figure out the short-term solution to getting this fair opened when it needs to be opened in August.
Jim, just let me respond to that, because I've had all those conversations in my own head for a month, okay, that you just had. And I've worked through some of them in my own thought process, and I've worked through some of them in conversations. There are a couple problems with trying to dump this on the state. Technically, the state fair might be state-owned property, but it's the Minnesota State Agricultural Society is actually a quasi-governmental entity and a nonprofit. And so it's not necessarily that the state feels any obligation. When I say that, John Harrington feels no obligation. And you can see even from my letter to the governor doesn't want to touch this matter either. So his chief of staff referred us to John. And so can that be changed by law? Maybe, but I don't think it's going to change fast enough for us to be able to do that this year. And
Two quick responses.
Yeah.
That state statute that created the quasi,
yeah,
right? State statute. And two is, I'm not a plumber, but I do know what falls to the bottom, right? And I don't know that we should be at the bottom and be forced to take care of this without pushing back.
Well, Jim, is the real issue then, all these issues that you're raising about the fear of trouble, they really come down to liability. And I think the fair is willing and able to pay for liability coverage that makes us whole. And I know that they've talked to some private brokers already that have given some quotes. The risk managers indicated that they want more than just the $3 million coverage. But I just think we need to look for ways to be protected, which is really Ryan's memo, without trying to redesign what we've got with less than 60 days to go here. I don't think we can redesign it at this point. I think while those are all good ideas and conversations, I don't think they can be fruitful between now and August 25th. And, my priority is making sure that we have a safe fair. I think the liability and the workers' comp issues can be resolved in the next 2 months. But if we don't provide the service there as the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office, it's not going to be safe enough that I want my family going. Because I know what it's going to take to build an infrastructure of safety. It's going to take a lot of work. And I got goosebumps on my arm thinking about what it's going to take.
I am going to start, we're sort of going over the same turf here. Are you done, Jim?
Yeah. Well, not really, but I'll...
Are we still going to talk about civil disobedience?
Go ahead, Trista.
Thank you.
Trista's been...
And I know this is going a little long, and again, you've had more time with it, so we just have questions. And so, in my mind is how do we get to yes, right? And what does that look like? And it may not be that it's us that gets to yes, as Commissioner McDonough has pointed out. And the other thing, I'm wondering from the state fair, what's plan B? Because I'm sure you've got one. You're not putting on this multi-million-dollar event and don't have plan B, because you're smarter than that. I think about if tomorrow suddenly COVID were to spike, God forbid, and they suddenly said, now we have to go only 10,000 people at your event. I'm sure you've got a plan for that. I participated in the mini fair. It was lovely, by the way. I like little fairs. Right? But so you've got a plan B. And does that plan B involve safety? Because it's easier to patrol and keep safety with 10,000 people than it is with 1 million people. And so is it a 3-week fair with smaller attendance? What's your plan B?
Well, up until, forgive me, I'm repeating myself. Up until 6 weeks ago, we didn't know what the fair might look like. 8 weeks ago, we didn't even know if there'd be a fair. Mm-hmm. Part of our discussion since last May 22nd of last year, when the fair was canceled, is what might it look like? Restricted attendance, how exactly would you do that? And the Memorial Day event was basically a practice event that was set up in February when all the COVID restrictions were still in place. By the time that event came around, a lot of restrictions had changed, but we kept that model anyway because we don't know. Everything's heading in the right direction with COVID. Right. And to do a fair the way it looks like most likely it will be is to just proceed, and that's what we're doing now. Some of it is we're taking a chance that things will continue to move as they are. If they don't, then we'll pull back very quickly. And this is all, it's all related. When the fair does well, then we do more to the fairgrounds. We do more maintenance and improvements. We expand programming. If we have a not so good year, then we pull that back in. But the fair doesn't, there's no dividends, there's no anything. It's just whatever the fair makes puts right back into the grounds and into the fair itself. So if, God forbid, COVID blew up again, a lot of the work that we've done, a lot of the commitments we're making, we'd have to try to reel back in as best we could. As far as the law enforcement part of our public safety program is concerned, well, we'd have to go back at it. Very likely it would be with a chief of police model, with a chief law enforcement officer. But and I want to clarify as well. When we contacted the sheriff's office, it wasn't because it wasn't option number 2. It was option number 1, and that was the best thing to do at that time. We've done a lot of research with other fairs, festivals around the nation. This is the model. This is what's done, and there's a lot of smart people here today. There are others I know working on it that'll find a way to do it. As for liability, we're more than willing to accept that. That's been part of the discussion right from the get-go. 30 seconds in, Scott, does that sound about right? All right. That's about right, yeah.
So there is a plan. But you do have a plan B if this doesn't work out.
Well, if this doesn't, then this is the agency that makes most sense.
Sure, yeah.
Beyond that, it's state patrol, but because of what's going on, 2 things, as Sheriff Fletcher mentioned. One is the way they're structured now, their responsibility is highways, it's roads. Add in line 3, it gets a little more complicated for them. So it would be reconstituting our own police force, which would very heavily involve the Ramsey County Sheriff's Department regardless.
Right. Thank you.
Victoria?
Okay, I'm just going to jump through things because, one thing to the next because of the time. First of all, Sheriff Fletcher, you commented that if there were additional costs for liability or any other part of that, it could come out of the $200,000 to $300,000 we're going to make. The answer to that for me is no. No, you said that you would be willing to put in more if we needed.
No, I'm talking about workers' compensation issues that might be, which is slightly different than liability issues. And I'm sure Ryan will be able to put pen to paper on those.
Okay, and what I'm saying is whatever additional costs there are will be borne by the state fair. So the expected $200,000 to $300,000 doesn't get dipped into because there are additional costs, because that would be an additional cost. Okay. Secondly, we talked about communication, policing, patrol, and whenever we are doing, as the sheriff's office, the state patrol has its line of duties, and that's not doing patrolling or policing unless they've got a contract to do that, which I don't know that they do that. But for us, it's the same thing. The sheriff's office has certain responsibilities, and you police and patrol in the contract cities, and that's the job there. So this is why we need to have this contract in place. And that gets me to my last point, and that is when you said that you were doing things without contracts that came to this board, please, when it is Ramsey County employees, we need to have contracts in place so that we make sure that they are covered. That's got nothing to do with the service they provide, but as Ramsey County employees, we have certain obligations, and if they're not under a contract to do something that's outside of their normal responsibilities because they're doing something for the sheriff's department or for a local municipality or whoever it is, that needs to be more closely watched. And I don't want to hear that there are things that are happening that you're being paid for that don't even have a contract in place.
Well, Madam Chair, Commissioner Reinhardt, we've known each other for longer than anybody on this board, and I respect everything you said. I do want to say that the county has set a procedure in place for small activities like the $80 an hour for weddings or for Cummings wanting some security. But I think where we would come to an agreement, at some point there needs to be a threshold on how large those are and how much flexibility the sheriff has. I'm willing to work with Ryan to make sure we get those right in the future.
Well, I know we have a limit, or you can do up to a certain amount that you can purchase. I didn't know that you had a certain amount that you didn't even have a contract for, but we can deal with that later.
Victoria, I was going to suggest that we have, and then I'll go to you, Nicole. But all this list of items have been coming up, and we've been taking notes. But added to your list is that we have Scott lead a group with the sheriff and the state folks, the state fair, and come back to us with all these issues that we've outlined, to make sure all the T's and the dots are crossed, or we don't vote on it. It's just that simple.
And Mr. Chair, I would like to have, I think it would be important for our staff to know if we are in agreement that the duration of the contract would be somewhere that covers this year, that
Yes.
it is.
That was the other piece I was going to say.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we didn't lose that.
My understanding from hearing from everybody is that this would be short-term, and including the sheriff, I heard him say it, and then we would look at it if long-term.
Yes, thank you.
Nicole.
Thank you. Well, first, I just wanted to say thank you for coming and taking the time today to cover the history of these conversations.
Hello,
it's nice to have a
nice
full
meeting you.
I want
timeline.
to say thank you for smiling.
Hey, Bob.
It makes everyone feel better. And hearing the development of this arrangement and taking the time to dig into some of these issues and these concerns that we have, we do appreciate it. You know, we are all, I've heard you say many times, you just want there to be a safe state fair. We all want that too, and we just want to make sure we're fulfilling our obligations as well. I concur with the chair that it does seem like a short duration contract or JPA makes sense right now. And I am open to the idea of exploring what a broader arrangement would look like. I do hope that the legislators and Governor Walz are listening to this, because I think there is time to put in some, at least state-held liability for this, since ours is the agency that's stepping up and saying, we all want a fair, but we're the only ones willing to put some skin in the game right now, it seems like. So it would be nice to see the state step up and be willing to take even liability through the end of the year for issues that happen on the state fairgrounds. I would like to see a commitment both at the state level and from the sheriff's office at the state fair for a broader state-supported safety plan for future years and a broader joint JPA. I would assume that if there's already a JP in place with St. Paul Police, we can't get into a joint one this year for establishing our own, because that would already be in existence. But looking forward to the future, how do we get something more comprehensive, and what level of state support is there? Because this is a benefit to all of the residents of Minnesota. And in terms of contract details, I really hope that we can see a draft JPA relatively soon to ensure that those T's are crossed and I's are dotted. To Commissioner Reinhardt's point, I don't know if I need a guaranteed profit, but I would like to see some sort of safety mechanism. I would love to see profit, but you know, it's a contract. We're each entitled to the benefit of our bargain. I just want to make sure, like in this situation, it really feels like the benefit of this contract is really tilted towards the state fair and not Ramsey County, and to ensure that that benefit is balanced, that there is something to hold us harmless, where if for some reason or another, the cost that we incur ends up being exceeding that $80 an hour, and if we can verify the increased costs that the state fair can make us whole for that. That's for the lawyers in the back. But then also, I think the other piece that I'd like to see, and one of the things that came up is the temporary employees, just some sort of more information about what would be the difference in terms of the training received from officers that come in between our full-time officers and these temporary officers. I think that would be helpful for us, especially, you know, earlier not knowing that some of the contracts we had forming, not all of our policies were followed and embedded. So being able to ensure that we can be conscientious about that and know what training is being provided. Those are two important things I'd like to see in a draft JPA relatively soon. So we can find a way to get to yes on this, because I do think this is important. I appreciate you stepping up in your commitment to a safe state fair. That's a new tongue twister. And I do hope our state partners will also step up on some of these issues, since we're taking all the heavy lifting on logistics and planning. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say one quick thing. It'll be really quick.
How quick?
The public safety bill is still open at the legislature. I mean, it's still open. So, I mean, this week, they can take amendments. They're doing it, they're talking a long time on these bills. So the governor will not let the state fair go unprotected. So I think some of these things we've talked about, of them taking out some of this liability, would be appropriate. So I just.
You guys have a lobbyist, we don't.
Well, I think it's a state fair, actually, that can help with that. I mean, we gotta figure out, they need to, that should be part
Well,
of it.
that is a good point, that the state fair needs to, it's not just about managing it, it is a different type of an asset. So maybe we need to, part of the agenda long-term is to look at the option of how do we make changes at the state level.
I think at long term we could. If we can get in the middle of that public safety bill with all the police reform and finance things, I think that would be a tough.
This might be something they agree to, actually, the state fair.
They'd
The
put this
state
in
fair.
any bill.
They will put this anywhere to keep the state fair going, I will tell you that. Alice and those people will take
So
this.
we got a clear path here, short-term? We agree, Scott's gonna lead, we're gonna have that work group between you three guys there.
Kyle Meestad will be our representative on the working
Well,
group.
I don't care who you appoint, I'm pointing to you. So it's you three guys, and we'll come back with a plan short-term. Does that make sense? And I'm gonna give Ryan the last word here. Anything you've got to say?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. A couple of suggestions, if you'd be amenable to them. We'll expand the work group, the fair, the sheriff's office, Scott for sure, the county attorney's office, risk management will be a part of it, HR, the hiring questions, one I just need to talk through and understand. I would encourage someone from Hennepin County and DPS, Scott, to be considered as a part two. I know they'll be in their own agreement, but it's just good to have that table working. I would highlight, if the bill's still open, a conversation with the chair we could have as a follow-up is a final outreach to the state before we dive in waist deep this week to explore that, and just, it can corroborate the conversations that have already happened, but it feels like there's an opportunity. I briefly was touching base with the county attorney's office. I think what the board would expect as we move forward is we're actually going to try and tack two different joint powers agreements. The first one would be to cover the existing security agreement. I appreciate the apology up front about not in place yet. We will work to get that in place as soon as possible so that we don't have employees operating under any kind of ambiguity, and that gives clarity. And then we'll work on the period for the state fair itself. And I think we can dual track both. They're mutually reinforcing of one another, but it provides clarity in the near term as we build toward the fair. I would commit to the idea that we'll ask the working group to provide some sort of a brief update every Tuesday to the board, either through my county connections update, or we can have Scott do it through the board meeting. So even as issues are being worked out, we can talk about them. The issues all got addressed today that were in the memo, so I do appreciate that. I'm sorry, Jerry, I did have one quick question for you. The State Ag Board is done meeting before the fair, my understanding is. I assume you have the authority to execute agreements on behalf of the organization going forward, or is that an issue that we need to figure out?
No, I do, but if.
No buts.
No, there is one this time. If there is some action that would require the board, we can get a meeting in a day.
Okay. And ultimately, I would just end, Mr. Chair, that on the question of even the policy question around the should and the level of risk, there is no dispute that there is a certain level of risk that any entity takes on. We can talk about the magnitude of that risk. We'll do everything we can to limit it and think about exposure and where it's at. We'll work with the professionals throughout the sheriff's office to do what we can. We'll highlight that for you before any decisions or board votes need to be taken on the topic, and to be as clear on it as possible. We'll do what we can to bring some stuff back.
Mr. Chair, one final question to Ryan. Corn dog or Pronto Pup?
Pass on both.
Okay.
Cheese curds.
I do have,
Turkey sandwich.
if I may, Mr.
Jerry.
Chair. Mr. Chair, we wish we weren't in this position, but we are. So we don't choose what time we have, it chooses us. What's important is what we do with the time we have, and we're very grateful on behalf of 2 million very happy fairgoers every year, and another 1 million that use the fairgrounds off-season, for all the hard work the Sheriff's Department has done in stepping up, to Ryan and to Scott. So you guys have done everything to expedite things and really move them and just get them moving. And to you today for being here to discuss the great Minnesota Get Back Together. So, thank you.
Thank you for taking the time. We are adjourned.